On the evening of July 13th, 2020, Corinna Smith seemed like any other wife returning home after a day out with her daughter. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. After a tense conversation, a long-buried family secret had been revealed, one that would change everything. Consumed by emotion, Corinna made a phone call, then another. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the past and the horrifying implications of what she had just learned. As the hours passed, she grew more agitated. Then, just before midnight, she walked into her kitchen, filled a kettle and turned it on. Twice she boiled the water. Then, with a steady hand, she poured in bag after bag of sugar, creating a thick, scalding syrup mixture. When it was ready, she carried the bucket into the bedroom where her husband, Michael, lay sleeping, completely unaware of what was about to happen. At 21, Corinna Smith married 42-year-old Michael Baines. Both had been previously married with children from past relationships, but together they had a son, Craig Baines. To family and friends, they appeared to be a typical couple, navigating the usual ups and downs of married life, and for many years, their marriage seemed generally happy. However, Michael displayed some controlling behaviors throughout their relationship, something Corinna endured without much protest. They lived on Highfield Road in Neston, Cheshire, and as the years passed, their significant age gap became more apparent. By the time they had been married for 38 years, Corinna was 59 and Michael was 80. With his declining health, she had taken on the role of his carer. On the surface, their household seemed normal, but beneath it all, a tragic event from 2007 lingered in their lives, setting the stage for something far more devastating to come. In 2007, Corinna and Michael's only son, Craig, tragically took his own life. Before his death, Craig had been deeply troubled and had even served time in prison for a serious assault. His downward spiral was something his family struggled to understand. When Corinna spoke to him about it, Craig confided in her that the man he had attacked was a paedophile who had touched him sexually. The day before his death, he had been visibly distressed and told his mother, "Mum, he's a paedophile." Corinna assumed he was referring to the man he had assaulted, but when Craig seemed happier the next day, she chose not to press the issue further. Then, in a devastating turn, Craig took his own life. Corinna was left shattered, drowning in guilt for not pushing him to open up more. From that moment on, Corinna carried the unbearable weight of blame for the following years, torturing herself with the thought that she could have done something to save Craig. The grief and guilt consumed her, becoming a shadow that followed her every day. But in 2020, more than a decade after Craig's tragic death, a shocking family secret came to light, one that would shake Corinna to her core and potentially explain the true reason behind her son's suffering. On the 13th of July, 2020, Corinna spent the day shopping with her daughter before returning to her daughter's house. She wanted to stay longer, so she called her husband Michael to let him know she would be late. Michael was unhappy and seemed impatient for her to come home. Sensing tension between her mother and stepfather, Corinna's daughter criticized Michael's treatment of her, leading to a dispute about him. Her daughter then suggested that Corinna ask Michael what he had done, or, if she didn't, she would tell her herself. This was not the first time her daughter had hinted at having something important to reveal. This time, Corinna told her to say it outright. Finally, her daughter then broke down and said that Michael had sexually abused her and Craig for many years when they were children. Her daughter was plainly very distressed giving Corinna this information and gave limited details, saying it was so bad that she could not tell her. Her daughter further told Corinna that this was why Craig had taken his own life. Corinna was in shock and struggled to process everything, but she quickly connected what Craig had said the day before he died with what her daughter was now revealing. She was devastated, overwhelmed with rage and grief at the thought of what had been done to her children. Her first instinct was to call the police, but her daughter urged her to wait. She was concerned about dividing the family and suggested taking a polygraph test first to prove the truth of her claims before involving anyone else. Throughout the afternoon and evening, Corinna replayed events in her mind, growing more convinced that her daughter was telling the truth. A plan was formed. Her daughter would take a polygraph test, and Corinna would convince Michael to take one as well. They found a company that conducted polygraph tests and booked an appointment, paying a £600 advance fee. Corinna was then taken home at around 9:30 p.m, where she called her son. He did not believe the allegations. She then spoke to her daughter again, who was distressed that Corinna had gone against their plan by telling her brother first. Corinna then called her cousin. Throughout each conversation, she remained in a highly emotional state. Less than an hour after her final phone call, around midnight, Corinna boiled her kettle twice before emptying the hot water into a bucket from her garden. She then mixed in 3 bags of sugar, approximately 6 pounds, to create a thick scalding mixture. The entire process was estimated to have taken her 13 minutes. With Michael asleep in bed, Corinna entered the room and poured the boiling sugar water over his arms and torso. Most of the mixture landed on him, causing severe burns across 36% of his body. At one point, she suggested that she may have been aiming for his genitals, though there was no clear evidence of intent. After the attack, Corinna left Michael writhing in agony and fled the house. She ran to a neighbor's home 8 doors down, banging on the front door until they answered. In a panicked state, she told them, "I've hurt him really bad. I think I've killed him." Security footage later captured her visibly distressed. The neighbor immediately called the police and an ambulance, which arrived shortly after. Corinna was taken into custody and was said to be howling in distress by the time police arrived. Meanwhile, paramedics found Michael in excruciating pain, whimpering in bed with the skin on his right arm and hand peeling away. He was rushed to Wiston Hospital in Neston and placed in the burns unit in the early hours of July 14, 2020, in critical condition. "80-year-old Michael remained in the burns unit for just over a month in a stable condition. However, given his age and overall health, the burns proved life-threatening. His condition deteriorated, and on August 18, 2020, he passed away. Following the incident, Corinna was initially charged with grievous bodily harm. However, after Michael's death, the charges were upgraded to murder. At trial, Corinna denied murder but admitted to manslaughter, stating that she had intended to cause serious harm to her husband but not to kill him. Prosecutor Mark Rind told the court that multiple victim impact statements from family members outlined the distress they had suffered over the past year. The trial itself did not explore the truth of the allegations made against Michael, but the prosecution accepted that the allegations were made and that Corinna believed them. On Tuesday, June 15, 2021, after a 5-day trial at Chester Crown Court, a jury found Corinna guilty of murder. Corinna Smith was sentenced at Chester Crown Court on Friday, July 9th by the Honourable Mrs. Justice Amanda Yip, DBE. In her sentencing remarks, the judge emphasised that it was wrong for Corinna to take the law into her own hands. She stated that regardless of the serious allegations against Michael Baines, he was entitled to a fair trial to determine the truth. She said, "Although the background provides some explanation as to why you did what you did, I am sure you know that it cannot provide an excuse. Your actions cannot begin to be justified, whatever you believed your husband had done. You have taken Mr. Baines' life and caused terrible grief and shock for his children and those who loved him. Killing Mr. Baines also took away any opportunity for the allegations to be tested. That took away his right to a fair trial, bearing in mind that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. It also took away the right of your daughter to have her allegations heard and deprived other family members of the chance to establish the truth. The allegations are left hanging but unproven." She went on to explain how she was determining Corinna's sentence. Despite Corinna having no prior convictions and being described in court as a kind, loving, and charitable person, the judge acknowledged that her actions on that night were out of character. However, she emphasized that the only sentence for murder was a mandatory life sentence. She said, "There is only one sentence that the law allows to be passed for murder. That is a mandatory life sentence. I am required to specify the minimum term which must elapse before you can be released on license. I must then consider the aggravating and mitigating factors which are present. Your husband was an old man, he was not in the best of health, and you were his carer. He was in bed asleep at the time of the attack. I take into account his vulnerability and your domestic circumstances. The deliberate mixing of the hot sugar solution involved a degree of planning and sustained action. It can only have been designed to cause significant physical suffering, which is exactly what resulted. In short, it was a particularly nasty way to inflict serious harm." The judge concluded that while Corinna had not intended to kill Michael, she had acted in the heat of the moment with the intent to cause him serious harm. She said, "Set against this, I sentence you on the basis that your intention was to cause serious harm rather than to kill. Further, that intention was formed while you were in a state of distress. This was not a long-held and carefully formed plan. You made use of materials you already had at home. I accept that your initial reaction had been to call the police and that the intent to harm your husband only developed later when you were home and dwelling on what you had been told. On that basis, I am prepared to accept that you were in an acute stress state at the time of the attack and that you have displayed symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of all that happened on the 13th of July. However, the central factual issue for the jury was whether you had lost control, and I am satisfied that their verdict reflects their finding that you had not. I consider that you remember more than you were prepared to tell the jury, although it would not be surprising if you have blocked out some details of the traumatic events of that day." The judge concluded with her final remarks, explaining that while she sympathized with Corinna's circumstances, she still had a duty to impose a just punishment for her crimes. She said, "It is possible to have sympathy for the situation you found yourself in while still condemning your actions. On the one hand, the shocking revelations made by your daughter undoubtedly led to your uncharacteristic violence. Against that, you made the deliberate choice to inflict horrific injury and took calculated action to do just that. Aside from the dreadful physical pain you caused Mr. Baines, your actions have caused yet more pain and suffering for your families. This is perhaps best summed up by your son, who has struggled to make sense of what happened. He concluded that your actions, although very wrong, were an emotional reaction to the devastating information you had just received. I cannot put it any more eloquently than that. Corinna Smith, for the murder of Michael Baines, I sentence you to life imprisonment. The minimum term will be one of 12 years, less the 166 days that you have spent on remand in custody, and 96 days credit for time spent on a qualifying curfew. Corinna Smith was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 12 years, and she will be eligible for parole on June 3, 2032. Speaking after the verdict, Jane Morris, Crown Prosecutor for CPS, Mersey, Cheshire, said Smith's actions were deliberate and considered. She said, "She was clearly upset about the dispute, but the evidence demonstrated that she was in control and acted in anger when she poured the lethal mixture over her husband and wanted to extract vengeance. This case is deeply complex, and I'm sure a lot of you will have different opinions and thoughts on whether Corinna's sentence was fair. Corinna Smith found herself in an unimaginable situation. For years she carried the unbearable weight of her son's death, never fully understanding the pain that had led him to take his own life. When the devastating allegations against her husband surfaced, her emotions overwhelmed her, and in a moment of uncontrollable fury, she chose vengeance over the legal system. It's hard to put myself in her position and think what I would have done in her place. It's difficult to say what anyone would have done, but what's clear is that there are no winners in this tragic story. Corinna lost her freedom, 2 men lost their lives, and their children lost both parents in different but equally devastating ways. And worst of all, the truth, whatever it may be, will never truly be known. Please let me know your thoughts on this case, and as always, rest in peace, Craig Baines.